Hey, how's it going, guys? This lesson is on the major scale. This is the introduction to the major scale. And in this lesson I want to give you two different patterns, two different ways to play the major scale. So even though it's two different patterns, as you're going to see by the end of this lesson, it's the same thing, okay? You're playing the same thing, you're just playing in two different ways. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say that the major scale is the foundation of all music. Okay, so everything is derived from the major scale. All chords are derived from the major scale, and all other scales are derived from the major scale. Okay? So typically as guitar players, the first scale we learn is the pentatonic scale. Well, the pentatonic scale is a derivation of the major scale as well. But that's enough of that. Let me just get into teaching you about the major scale, and then in the other lessons on the other scales you can see how everything is derived from the major scale in those lessons. So the first pattern I want to give you for the major scale is this pattern that you see here. Okay, now this pattern, you start with your pinky. Okay, your pinky goes on the tonic note of the scale that you're playing. So as I said, I'm going to use the key of C major for this example. So C is your 8th fret on the low E string. So I'm going to put my pinky on the 8th fret of the low E string. And I can run through this pattern like so. Okay, so that was the C major scale. Now, if you remove some notes, you're left with the pentatonic scale. Okay, I'm sure you've seen this shape before. If you haven't, this is the pentatonic, the root position pentatonic scale. Okay, so starting on the red note and ending on the red note, I have my major pentatonic scale. Okay, so all I do is add a few notes, and I have my major scale. The major scale is just 2 more notes than the major pentatonic scale, okay? Pentatonic means 5. Pent is 5. So pentatonic scale uses 5 of the 7 notes. Same thing works for the minors, for the minor pentatonic and the minor scale. But this is about the major scale. So the major pentatonic is a derivation of the full major scale. Okay, so that was the first pattern that I wanted to show you for the major scale. Now the second pattern looks like this. This is your 3 note per string pattern. Alright, now this pattern starts with your first finger. Your first finger goes on the root note, the tonic note, okay, which C, again 8th fret, but now you start with your first finger and you play this like this. Okay, so it was the same thing. I just played it a different way. So running through the first pattern and then running through the second pattern, I want you to hear how they sound exactly the same. Okay, so starting with this one. Same thing. 2 different patterns. Same exact thing, okay? Now, this works for any scale on the guitar. You can always do different patterns for multiple scales, okay? But this particular lesson is on the major scale, obviously. But a good thing to recognize about this is, now that you know these 2 patterns for the major scale, one starting with your pinky, one starting with your first finger, you can now expand this. Okay, you see this expansion here? Rather than just playing in a little 4 to 5 fret area here or a 5 fret area here, rather than limiting yourself to that, you now have a range that expands this far, okay? So you can play pattern 1, you can play pattern 2, and now you can play this much, just knowing one scale, okay? Now, this scale expands all the way down the fretboard in both directions, but I have other lessons on that. For this particular lesson, I'm just going over these two patterns, okay? So we can call it pattern 1 or pattern 2. I personally refer to the first pattern as the home box. So I have a lesson on the home box. Check that lesson out. And I refer to the second pattern as the 3-note per string pattern, okay? Because there's 3 notes on each string within that particular major scale pattern. So the combination of the two gives you a soloing area of this much, all right? And that's one of the keys to unlocking the puzzle, the fretboard puzzle, because ultimately this is one big puzzle that we're trying to figure out over our lifetimes of playing. And for me personally, this 2-pattern connectivity method was one huge piece of the puzzle for me. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the introduction to the major scale. It's all you need to know. It's the root, it's the basis of all music, it's the foundation of which all scales and chords are derived, and I've given you 2 different patterns. One takes place right in this little home box area, and one takes place up here in the 3-note per string pattern. And together, you have a larger area to solo within. And these patterns can be applied to any key. I just happened to use C, which was on the 8th fret. I could have used any root note, okay? If I wanted to do the key of A, I could have simply moved my tonic note down to the 5th fret here, and then I could have played. Or okay, so now that was in the key of A major. These patterns can be applied to any key. As with everything else on the guitar, this scale is movable, and so is everything else, okay? If you don't understand what movable means, I also made a lesson on that called movability. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up, and I'll gladly help you out. Thank you.